We shall now study the sexual reproduction in plants. Flowers are the reproductive organs of plants, which have distinct male and female reproductive parts. A flower consists of sepal, petal, anther, and filament. Both of these are collectively known as stamen. Stamen is the male reproductive part of the flower. Stigma, style, ovary, ovules. These are collectively known as pistil, which is the female reproductive part of the flower. The structure of a flower can be viewed in detail with the help of the following animation.
पुष्प की संरचना। पुष्प धरती माँ पर
Flowers are one of the most beautiful creations on Mother Earth. According to the biologists, morphologically, the flower is a compressed shoot and reproductive organ in angiosperms, the flowering plants. Although flowers have astonishingly varied sizes, shapes, odor, and colors, they still possess the same basic structure. A typical flower has a pedicel, which is the stalk that holds the flower, and the thalamus, which is an enlarged part of the stalk that bears all the parts of flower. On the basis of presence or absence of pedicel, flowers are classified into pedicellate and sessile respectively. Rose is a pedicellate flower, while bottle brush is a sessile flower. A typical flower has 4 whorls. Outer 2 whorls consist of accessory organs and inner 2 whorls consist of essential organs. The accessory organs consist of sepals and petals, also known as calyx and corolla respectively. Calyx is usually green in color, and during the bud stage, it protects the inner organs of the young flower. Some flowers like datura have fused or united sepals, while others like rose has free sepals. Corolla is generally large, elaborate, bright-colored and sweet-smelling, which helps in attracting insects, moths and honeybees during pollination. Like sepals, petals are also united as well as free. For example, bluebell flower has fused petals, while aster flower has free petals. In monocotyledon plants, the calyx and the corolla are undifferentiated and they are collectively called as perianth, while the individual members are known as tepals. The essential organs are stamens or microsporophylls, which form the androecium, that is, the male reproductive organ of the flower, and the carpels or megasporophylls, which form the gynoecium, that is, female reproductive organ
of the flower. The stamen is a cylindrical, stalk-like structure which consists of proximal sterile part called the filament and a distal fertile part, an anther. The anther consists of 4 microsporangia, also known as pollen sacs. These pollen sacs are separated by a thin layer of tissue known as connective. Each pollen sac contains numerous pollen grains or microspores. When mature anther dehisces, pollen grains are released from it. The carpel is divided into a proximal ovule-bearing part known as the ovary, a distal pollen receptive part known as the stigma, and a median sterile part called the style. The style holds the stigma and carpel is also known as the pistil. The ovary has one or more chambers known as locules. The ovules are attached to the walls of the ovary with the help of a structure called the placenta. The pattern of ovule arrangement in the ovary is called placentation. Different flowers bloom at different times of the year. Some plants like Windsor rosea bloom throughout the year, while blooming in some parts like neem and mango occurs once in a year. Flowers are always the best way to express our feelings, no matter what the reason or occasion might be. They are the ultimate ornaments to enhance aesthetics of a place.
Flowers can be classified into 2 types: unisexual flowers and bisexual flowers. Firstly, we define the unisexual flowers. Flowers that have either of the 2 reproductive parts, either stamen or pistil in them, are known as unisexual flowers. Next, we define the bisexual flowers. Flowers that have both the reproductive parts, both stamen and pistil, are known as bisexual flowers. Let us now understand about the process of sexual reproduction in plants. Male reproductive parts, which are also known as stamen, produce small structures called pollens. Inside each pollen, there are 2 male gametes. Now, we shall now discuss about the pollination in plants. The transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma is called pollination. First, we will learn about self-pollination, the kind of pollination where pollens are transferred from anther to stigma of the same flower is called self-pollination. Next, we shall look what happens in cross-pollination, the kind of pollination where pollens are transferred from anther of one flower to stigma of another flower of the same species is called cross-pollination. First possibility can be that the pollens are transferred to the different flowers of the same plant. Second possibility is that the pollens are transferred to the different flowers of different plants. Now let us explore more about the process of pollination in plants with the help of animation.
Pollen grains or microspores are the male reproductive bodies of a flower. Pollen grains are very minute, dust-like particles. Pollen grains can be observed by placing a finger or any object like a pen over the ripe anther. A yellowish powdery mass of pollen grains appear over the pen. As the mature anther dries up, anther lobe wall is ruptured, thus exposing the pollen grains or spores. The exposed spores are picked up by various agencies or vectors for pollination. Pollen grains are of various shapes and sizes and specific to a plant. These characteristics are hence useful in identifying the species. The wall or covering of pollen grains has two layers, outer exine and inner intine. The study of external morphology of mature pollen grains is called palynology. Many insects and bees eat pollen and hence act as vectors for the transfer of pollen from the anther to the stigma of the flower. Pollen grains, thus transferred, germinate and transport the gametes to the ovule for fertilization. Fertilization leads to the production of seeds and fruits, which are responsible for continuity of plant life.
The processes of pollination and fertilization in plants can be depicted with the help of this diagram. Anther produces pollen grain that, by the process of pollination, reaches the compatible stigma. Pollen grain germinates and gives rise to pollen tube. Pollen tube reaches the ovule and fertilizes the egg. After fertilization, zygote is formed. Now let us see the process of pollination and fertilization in plants with the help of this animation.
Flowers are the most beautiful part of a plant. Sexual reproduction in plants takes place with the help of flowers. The male reproductive part of the flower is the stamen, and the female reproductive part is the carpel. The stamen is a cylindrical stalk-like structure which consists of filament and anther. The anther consists of pollen sacs. Each pollen sac contains numerous pollens. When mature anther dehisces, pollen grains are released from it. The mature pollen grain is a double cell wall structure composed of outer exine and inner intine. The female reproductive part of the plant or carpel is divided into three parts: ovary, style, and stigma. The ovary of the carpel bears the ovule, which encloses the female gamete. An ovule contains one or two protective coverings called integuments. The integument has a small opening called micropyle at one end for the entry of the pollen tube. Integuments enclose the nucellus, which is a protecting mass of tissue. Inside the nucellus, embryo sac is present. During the maturation phase of the embryo, three of the nuclei form the antipodal cells. At the micropylar end, three cells are formed. Out of these, two are synergids, and one forms the egg cell. In the center, a large central cell is present, which contains two polar nuclei. During pollination, many pollen grains from various plants are deposited on the stigma of the flower, but only pollen of the same species grows in the pollen tube. The pollen grain absorbs the sugary secretions of the stigma, swells up, and ruptures. A pollen tube grows down into the style, deriving nourishment from the tissues of the style. A mature pollen grain that reaches the stigma of a flower contains two nuclei, a generative nucleus and a tube nucleus. Within the pollen tube, the generative nucleus divides mitotically to produce two male gametes. Thus, there are three nuclei sharing a common cytoplasm. The pollen tube continues to grow towards the ovary by dissolving the tissues with the help of enzymes.
Let us discuss what happens after fertilization. After fertilization, ovary ripens into fruit, while other flower parts wither.
Fruits are a source of food for us and important parts for the plant. A fruit is defined as the ripened ovary of a seed-bearing plant. After fertilization, the ovary develops into a fruit and other parts of the flower fall off. As the ovule begins to develop into a seed, the ovary wall matures into a fruit wall or a pericarp. A fruit becomes sweeter, less green, and softer as it ripens. An unripe mango is green and sour. However, with ripening, it becomes yellow, fleshy, flavored, and ready to be eaten. A fruit has two main parts, namely pericarp or fruit wall and seed. The pericarp consists of three parts: epicarp, mesocarp, and endocarp. Epicarp is the outermost thin covering of the fruit. Mesocarp includes the sweet and fleshy middle layer of the fruit. Endocarp is the inner hard part of the fruit that contains seed.
Let us discuss what happens after fertilization. After fertilization, ovary ripens into fruit, while other flower parts wither.
Fruits are a source of food for us and important parts for the plant. A fruit is defined as the ripened ovary of a seed-bearing plant. After fertilization, the ovary develops into a fruit and other parts of the flower fall off. As the ovule begins to develop into a seed, the ovary wall matures into a fruit wall or a pericarp. A fruit becomes sweeter, less green, and softer as it ripens. An unripe mango is green and sour. However, with ripening, it becomes yellow, fleshy, flavored, and ready to be eaten. A fruit has two main parts, namely pericarp or fruit wall and seed. The pericarp consists of three parts: epicarp, mesocarp, and endocarp. Epicarp is the outermost thin covering of the fruit. Mesocarp includes the sweet and fleshy middle layer of the fruit. Endocarp is the inner hard part of the fruit that contains seed. Pericarp can be thick or thin, hard or soft, according to the type of the fruit. For instance, the pericarp is soft and fleshy in tomato and papaya, while it is dry in gram and maize. In the absence of fertilization, the seed fails to develop. Consequently, the ovary does not mature into a fruit. Still, some fruits like grapes develop without fertilization. The development of a fruit without fertilization is known as parthenocarpy. Parthenocarpic fruits are seedless fruits. In general, fruits are broadly categorized into two major classes: fleshy fruits and dry fruits. A fleshy fruit has a pulpy or fleshy part between its covering and the seeds. Some fleshy fruits are mango, orange, and peach. Dry fruits have dried outer covering with water removed, either naturally or artificially. Some examples of dry fruits are walnut, pistachio, and raisins. As we know, after fertilization, the ovules develop into its seeds inside the ovary. The fruits not formed from the ovary but from another part of the plant. These are sometimes called false fruits or pseudocarps. In fruits like apple and pear, ovaries do not form fleshy regions. Here, the flower base forms the fleshy part of the fruit that we eat. A seed encloses a tiny plant called embryo, and cotyledon, the reserve food for the developing embryo. Embryo comprises two main parts, plumule and radicle. Plumule is the embryonic shoot, while radicle is the embryonic root. The protective hard outer covering of a seed is known as seed coat or testa. The tiny opening in the seed coat is called micropyle. That helps in the absorption of water to facilitate germination. On the basis of the number of cotyledons, seeds are classified into two types, namely monocot seed and dicot seed. Mono means single or one. Thus, seeds having one cotyledon are called monocot seeds. Some examples are rice, wheat, and corn. Di means two. Thus, seeds having two cotyledons are called dicot seeds. Some examples of dicot seeds are Bengal gram, green gram, and kidney bean. Fruits are important reproductive parts of plant, as they protect the seeds before they germinate and assist in their dispersal.
Now you may.
The transfer of seeds from one place to another is called seed dispersal. Dispersal of seeds is necessary to prevent overcrowding of seeds because overcrowded seeds are not able to get proper nutrients.
to help plant in invading new areas. Hence, wider distribution of plants is possible. Agents of seed dispersal. There are 4 agents of seed dispersal, which are as follows. Wind. The seeds dispersed by wind having certain features like lightweight and hairy surface that aid in their dispersal. Water. Seeds of many plants found near water bodies are dispersed by water. Bursting. Some fruits burst open to release seeds by sudden jerk. Animals. Certain seeds have modified structures that help them to attach themselves to the body of animals for dispersal to distant places.